The sun scorched the cracked earth, beating down mercilessly, as a lone figure urged his weary horse down the narrow, winding trail. Dust swirled in his wake, catching the fading light like embers in a dying fire. Nantan, the Apache warrior, bore the weight of countless battles in his scars and the haunted shadow in his eyes. His solitude was as vast and unforgiving as the desert itself, until, at the trail's bend, a faint flicker of life stirred hope from the wilderness of despair. The desert stretched endless and unyielding, a barren canvas of ochre and burnt sienna under an oppressive sky. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth like ancient sentinels, whispering warnings to those who dared traverse the treacherous path. The wind carried the brittle scent of sagebrush and sun-baked clay, while the heat shimmered above the ground in wavering waves, betraying the unforgiving harshness of this frontier. Against this relentless backdrop, Nantan appeared, tall, lean, and battle-worn. His face was etched with deep lines, each a testament to memories too heavy to speak aloud. His dark eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the horizon. The weight of loss clung to him like a second skin, the echo of vanished kin and broken bonds. His quiet breath came like a prayer lost in the vastness. Further down the dusty trail lay Amaya, struggling against the unforgiving sun. Her slender frame was bent with exhaustion, her hands, protecting a newborn, nestled close to her chest. Her skin, sunburned and streaked with grime, told the story of desperation and resilience. Her eyes, wide and searching, flickered with fear, not just of the blazing day, but of shadows unseen, lurking beyond the dry hills. Nantan's gaze softened as he took in the fragile tableau. The baby whimpered faintly, heat prickling at its delicate skin. Amaya's lips trembled, glancing wildly toward the horizon, as if expecting the desert itself to turn hostile. To Nantan, their plight was painfully familiar, a reflection of his own isolation and the fragile threads that held life together here. He moved deliberately, the soft thud of hooves tempered by the caution of one who knew well the dangers lurking in silence. Assessing the scene, Nantan's mind measured threats with a warrior's precision. The merciless sun that could claim them in hours. The lack of water that tightened throats, and men whose intent was shadowed by cruelty and greed, patrolling these routes like vultures. Decision settled like a stone in his chest. He would not leave them to the desert's silent claim. His hands, steady and sure despite scars, gathered brush and palm fronds with instinct born of legend and survival. Carefully, he fashioned a crude shelter beneath the scant shade of a twisted mesquite tree, a refuge frail but necessary against the relentless heat. Amaya's eyes met his, a flicker of hope warred with distrust. In the sudden quiet between them, the unspoken pact of survival took root. Nantan wrapped a coarse blanket tightly around the infant, his breath steadying in the charged stillness. Here, amid the desolation, two broken paths converged, a warrior bound by past wounds and a mother clinging to her precious charge. But the fragile calm shattered abruptly. A distant murmur grew into a roar of hooves, kicking up the desert dust. On the horizon, a cloud of dust billowed, racing closer with terrifying speed. A band of hunters and batadores, pursuers as relentless as the desert sun, closed in fast, their shadows stretching long and dark. The danger was no longer whispered. It thundered upon them like an unforgiving storm. Many companions who follow our legends across these forgotten lands have told us how destiny, or the treacherous YouTube algorithm, sometimes unravels their subscriptions without warning. Before the next perilous trail reveals itself and a new twist unfolds, glance quickly below this video and ensure you're still part of our band to not lose the thread of the tale. We don't want you to miss any voice echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. Nantan urged his horse faster, the rhythm of hooves pounding against dry earth, underscoring the urgency that throbbed in his chest. The distant cloud of dust, once a faint whisper on the horizon, now billowed closer with relentless determination, swallowing the sun's dying light. Ahead, gravity pulled him toward the narrow mouth of the canyon, a place he knew well, an old refuge carved into the sandstone cliffs where time and storms had forged a hidden sanctuary. Amaya clutched the fragile bundle at her breast with white-knuckled desperation. Her eyes flicked nervously between the approaching menace and the dimming path ahead. Each breath she took was shallow, strained by exhaustion and the ever-present weight of fear. Suspicion still lay thick between her and the stoic warrior. Trust was a fragile thread, stretched thin by the harsh truths of this savage land. The heat hung heavy, mingling with the dust stinging their faces. Nantan's gaze shifted to the infant. A faint wail, barely audible, pierced the heavy silence. His hands instinctively reached into his satchel, pulling out a small cloth, stiff with dried herbs. With gentle precision, he wiped the child's brow, the coolness of the fabric offering a brief reprieve from the relentless sun. "We must move faster," Nantan murmured, his voice low but steady. Amaya nodded, swallowing her distrust as she pressed closer to her protector. In this moment, survival outweighed suspicion. The warrior's eyes scanned their path, calculating, weighing every shadow and crevice for danger. The entrance to the cavern yawned before them, a dark slit carved into the red rock face. Nantan led the way, steadying his horse beside the jagged boulders. Amaya stumbled from the saddle, fatigue folding her knees, but she forced herself forward, determination flaring beneath her weariness. Inside, the cavern breathed cold relief. The air was thick with the musk of ancient earth and cool stone, a stark contrast to the blistering expanse they'd just escaped. Nantan lit a small fire with skillful hands, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across Amaya's pale face. The babies. Soft coos mingled with the crackle, a fragile lullaby to ward off despair. Space was tight, but here they could rest, tend to wounds, and, perhaps, think beyond the immediate threat. Amaya's hands trembled as she offered the child what little water she had left. Nantan watched silently as she coaxed the infant's lips, his mind already shifting, bearings set to fend off the patience of their pursuers. Hours slipped by, the cavern's darkness wrapping them in uneasy refuge. Amaya's eyes, though clouded with pain, searched Nantan's face, seeking any sign of pity or alliance. His expression remained guarded, his silence a barrier shaped by years of betrayal and loss. Yet in the shared breaths and the quiet tending of the babe, an unspoken truce took root. Around them, the desert night settled with a velvet cloak. But outside, the vague rumble of distant horses stirred the air. The patrol from the fort, tireless in their hunt, drew nearer. Their voices carried faintly on the wind, like a harbinger of danger. Nantan listened, every muscle taut as a bowstring, every sense keen to the imminent storm. Amaya shifted, clutching her midsection with a sudden sharp gasp. Her face contorted, waves of pain rolling across her like the desert sands in a relentless gale. The baby stirred restlessly, sensing the distress of its mother. Nantan's head snapped toward her, alert and steady. "Speak," he urged softly, voice rough but laced with concern. "My body, it tightens. The child, the birth, it is not yet over." Her words fractured by agony, she rocked forward, forehead pressed to cold stone. "I feared this day, the pain growing. I am not ready." Nantan's fierce gaze softened. He pulled from the worn cloth at his belt a bundle of dried herbs, memories of his tribe's ancient healing arts filling his mind. Time was against them, but he would not let fear dictate their fate. In the quiet sanctuary of the cavern, amidst the flickering firelight, he prepared to wield the fragile crafts of his ancestors. The dim glow flickered across Amaya's drawn features, sweat glistening as her body trembled. Instinct wove through Nantan's movements, gentle hands steadying, whispered chants almost lost to the wind's howl outside. Amaya's breaths deepened, the pain rising in tidal surges, unforgiving yet intimate. The baby wailed with growing insistence, their shared struggle echoing in the confined hollow of stone and shadow. The precarious thread of life drew taut as mother and child fought against the odds, the world beyond forgotten in this raw crucible of survival. Inside, a melody of silence and urgency played between them, a fragile bond forged through shared suffering and fierce determination. Nantan's eyes, dark and unwavering, never left Amaya's. In that gaze, a promise whirled unspoken. "You will not be alone in this fight." Outside, the restless wind carried news of their pursuers, a haunting drumbeat edging closer, threatening to tear through their fragile refuge. But within the cavern's depths, time slowed, and pain became a pathway to resilience. As the night pressed on, Amaya's labor intensified, the ancient dance of birth unfolding beneath the watchful vigilance of the warrior whose own scars told stories of survival and loss. The infant's cries grew stronger, a beacon of life amid the shadow of threat. Then, as the first threads of dawn tiptoed along the jagged canyon walls, Amaya's trembling hand pressed to her chest, eyes closed in exhaustion and relief. The baby, nestled safely in her arms, cooed softly, alive and unbroken. Nantan's breath hung heavy in the cavern air. He studied the child's tiny form, eyes catching a peculiar shape mapped across the infant's skin, a faint tribal mark, delicate yet undeniable. The knowledge stirred something deep inside him, a whisper from old legends and foreboding tales long passed down in his people's words. The dawn's pale light spilled into the cavern mouth, tinting the world in fragile hope and gathering shadows. Outside, the rumble of hooves edged ever closer, carrying with it the unforgiving hands of fate. Amaya's eyes met Nantan's once more, silent questions floating between them. The danger was no longer just beyond the horizon. It was at their doorstep, and the fight for survival was only just beginning. The cavern lay heavy with shadows, but the firelight flickered steady, casting a fragile warmth on the tangled forms within. Amaya's breaths came in uneven waves, her face pale and slick with sweat as pain seized her again, sharper and more relentless than before. Nantan sat close, the weight of his presence a silent anchor amid the storm that gripped her body. He pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, the scent of crushed sage and juniper rising in the quiet. A memory of distant fires and healing rituals whispered through generations. "Breathe steady," Nantan murmured, his voice low but firm. "Strong as river current, not like wildfire's rage." Amaya forced herself to match the tempo, though each contraction felt like the desert sun bearing down with cruel insistence. The heat inside the cave was clinging and raw, but the weight she carried was heavier still, both child and destiny entwining in ways she could scarcely understand. Nantan's hands worked with precise care, drawing from his satchel carefully wrapped bundles of herbs, sweetgrass, yarrow, and a bitter root known to soothe pain and cleanse wounds. He ground and brewed a bitter tea, his eyes never leaving Amaya's face, measuring each gasp, each tremor. His knowledge, arcane and sacred, rose to meet the moments where modern medicine was miles and centuries away. The infant shifted restlessly, a high-pitched wail echoing faintly through the hollow. Amaya tightened her grip, though her fingers faltered from exhaustion. Nantan leaned closer, his eyes catching the subtle sheen of tears gathering at her lashes. He spoke then, his words not just ritual, but promise. "You are strong. Child will come. Life will not yield to darkness." Time unraveled slowly. The past and present bled together in the flickering light, the sounds of the desert night reaching the ear through the narrow cave mouth. Distant coyote calls, the sharp whistle of the wind against stone, the faint and ominous thud of hooves beyond the horizon. The pursuers were drawing nearer, their shadows stretched long and brutal. Amaya's body stiffened as the moment neared. Nantan moved to support her, his scarred arms steady beneath hers, offering a calm strength, unspoken but deeply felt. "Hold to me, no fear." Labored breaths filled the space, birth's wild rhythm, a raw and sacred symphony beneath the weight of impending doom. The walls held their secret. The firelight danced upon their strained faces, and neither spoke beyond the murmurs of survival. Then, with a sudden, wrenching cry, a fragile wail piercing the stillness, the child came forth. Amaya sagged, sweat mingling with tears, but relief bloomed in the dim light as the infant's chest rose and fell in ragged but certain breaths. Nanton swiftly wrapped the newborn in soft cloth, eyes scanning the fragile form with awe and wary hope. Drawing the child closer, his gaze caught on a slight marking on the tiny skin, an elegant swirl, unlike any natural birthmark, shaped almost like the ancient symbols of his people that spoke of stars, spirits, and old prophecies. The mark was etched gently, yet with a certainty that sent a ripple through Nantan's chest. He drew a slow breath, the echo of old stories stirring in his mind. Tales of children born under signs, of destinies foretold, and of shadows that tracked such gifts. His heart hammered, not in hope, but in caution. That mark would not go unnoticed. Amaya noticed nothing, lost in the agony and wonder of new life, but Nanton's furrowed brow told her all she needed to know. "We must be swift," he said quietly, voice thick with unspoken fears. "This mark, it brings more than blessing." Outside, the distant rumble of hooves grew closer, pressing against the stillness like a storm about to break. The heavy night air carried the scent of dust and danger, and Nanton could feel the tightening noose of pursuit closing around them. He settled the newborn in Amaya's arms, watching the fragile rise and fall of the child's chest with fierce protectiveness. The bond between them deepened, no longer just hunter and hunted, but guardians of something that transcended the desert's cruelty. Eyes locked with Amaya's in a silent vow, they would face what came together. The cave's shadows lengthened, the world outside narrowing into the sharp edges of impending peril. The strange symbol on the infant's skin glimmered faintly in the firelight, a beacon to enemies yet unseen, a promise of trials to come. Nanton's jaw clenched as the truth settled like cold stone. This child's destiny would shape the fate of more than just their fragile lives. The noise of the patrol's approach became undeniable now, echoing closer through the rocky pass, and with that, the veil of night seemed to shudder as the first figures appeared, ghosted shapes cutting through the desert's breath toward the cave. Nanton's eyes darkened with resolve, knowing their fragile sanctuary was about to shatter. Nanton's voice caught in the cavern's heavy air as he eased into the weight of what he must share. His eyes traced the dim flicker of the firelight reflecting on Amaya's weary face, sensing the fragile walls of her mistrust. Yet the burden now demanded truth. "There is meaning," Nantan began, his voice low and deliberate, "in the mark on the child's skin. It is old, a symbol born in stories told by our people, long before these lands were scarred by war and fire." Amaya's brow furrowed, exhaustion giving way to sharp curiosity. "What meaning?" she asked, voice soft, but trembling with the weight of the unknown. Nantan drew a slow breath, recalling the whispered warnings of elders, the shadowed histories woven into the fabric of his tribe. "This symbol speaks of a union of two worlds, tied in hope, but fraught with danger. It is said that a child bearing this mark will bring change, but with it, unrest. Not all embrace the promise. The firelight meandered across the worn stones, as if echoing the unease settling between them. "You speak of prophecy?" Amaya's voice barely broke the silence, yet it trembled under its gravity. "Yes," Nantan replied, voice edged with caution, "and also of threat. A shunned shaman, Kael, seeks the child for dark purposes. His exile turned bitter, his heart twisted with night's shadow. He commands a faction that moves through the land like ghosts, relentless, ruthless." Amaya's fingers tightened protectively around the newborn, a fierce light igniting in her tired eyes. "What do they want? Power over old spirits, control through fear. They hope to bend the child's fate to their will, to raise a storm that will tear apart the tribes and the settlers alike." The gravity of the revelation carved itself deeper into the night. The child in Amaya's arms was no mere infant, but a lodestar, a beacon calling forth forces eager to grasp its light. Nantan's gaze sharpened, eyes flicking to the cave's dark entrance. Beyond lay a fragile veil of peace, already pierced by shadows. Outside, the desert breeze whispered secrets, carrying a chill foreign to the harsh sun. Then, faint and deliberate, the crunch of dry earth shifted like a whisper of danger. Nantan's muscles tensed. Years of survival sharpened his senses to a razor's edge. From around a ragged outcrop, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness and moving like a wraith. The stranger's steps were deliberate, yet silent, blending with the night. The hood draped low, hiding a face carved by unseen cruelty. Amaya stiffened, but did not cry out. Nantan rose slowly, placing himself between the intruder and the fragile life in Amaya's arms. "Who comes in shadows?" Nantan's voice broke the silence, low and fierce. The figure paused, then spoke with a voice like rusted blades, barely more than a hiss. "The child is mine by right of blood and fate. Step aside, warrior, or be broken." Nantan's hand moved in an instant, fingers curling into the worn grip of his knife. Yet, even as the threat revealed itself, he knew this was no ordinary enemy. This was Kael's envoy, sent to sow fear, to test their defenses. Amaya's wide eyes locked with Nantan's, silent questions and desperate hope mingling in an unspoken plea. "We will not yield," Nantan said, voice unwavering. "You come for things you do not understand. This infant carries hope where you see only shadows." The figure's laugh was a dry crack, void of warmth. "Hope is a flicker, easily snuffed. The shaman awaits. You cannot hide the boy forever." Tension coiled like a serpent in the air as the figure retreated, melting back into the desert's grasp like mist swallowed by dawn. Nantan's heart pounded, a war drum warning of encroaching storms. He looked down at the infant's small chest rising and falling, silent yet defiant. "We have been found," Nantan said with grim finality, turning to Amaya. "Tonight may no longer hold safety." Her grip tightened, resolve burning despite exhaustion. "Then we must be ready." Together, they moved within the cavern shadows, minds alight with urgency. To flee now meant risking the desert's ruthless embrace. To stand meant war with shadows yet unseen. Nantan's gaze fell once more on the fragile symbol adorning the child, a silent summons to a destiny No one could escape. As darkness deepened outside, the figure that watched from beyond vanished into the night. But their presence was as tangible as the stones beneath their feet. The cave, once a haven carved from ancient stone, now felt exposed, an island, shrinking in the sea of coming peril. Nantan drew Amaya closer, whispering ancient prayers beneath his breath, voices woven from hope and warning alike. Their sanctuary held only moments longer before the wind carried fresh footsteps, soft, deliberate, closing in. The enemy had arrived, and with them the long shadow of a war yet to come. Nantan's harsh breaths mingled with the dry desert wind as he stood silently at the cave's mouth, eyes narrowing against the dimming light. The cloaked figure had vanished into the shadows, but the echo of its threat hung heavy in the still air. Inside, Amaya pressed the newborn close, her face pale, muscles tense, yet firing with defiance. She had not faltered, despite the ruthless words that lingered like a poison. And Nantan was certain the danger was far from over. "We cannot stay," he said quietly, voice low yet firm, the weight of the child's future pressing on him like the desert sun overhead. "That shadow, it is a warning. They know where we hide." Amaya's eyes caught his, burning bright despite exhaustion. "Then where? The sun and stones do not favor the lost." A flicker of weariness crossed Nantan's weathered features. His tribe's lands sprawled over brutal mesas and hidden valleys, places where whispers turned into legends. "We ride to the encampment. My people may give us sanctuary, but be warned, your presence and that mark upon the child brings storm with them." A faint stirring outside drew their attention, cautious and swift. Nantan gathered their sparse belongings while Amaya wrapped the baby in blankets. They slipped from the cavern, shadows cloaking their retreat as the sun bled red against the rocky horizon. The path toward the camp was unforgiving. Jagged rocks and thorny brush clawed at their progress, and every rustle carried the threat of pursuit. Nantan's horse moved with controlled urgency, muscles tensed to burst at his silent command. Amaya rode perched behind him, fragile yet iron-willed, clinging to the warmth of her child as sand and wind assailed them. Tension knotted the air between them, thick and unspoken. Once, suspicion had marked their bond. Now, it twisted into cautious hope. Every glance shared was a pact. They would protect this fragile life, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the barren trail, the distant thunder of hooves shattered the fragile quiet. Nantan's eyes glinted with grim resolve. The patrol of the fort had tracked their scent with relentless skill. With little warning, riders burst from cover, dark silhouettes, brandishing rifles and menacing intent. "Hold fast," Nantan growled, shifting abruptly, shielded by the weathered bark of an old juniper. In one fluid motion, he swung down, drawing his worn knife, its blade gleaming in the dying light. Bullets tore through the air, clinking against rock and earth, but none found flesh. Nantan moved with practiced ferocity, blocking a charging soldier with the flat of his blade, then countering with a sharp strike that sent his foe sprawling. With a shout, he directed Amaya to dismount and find cover near a thicket, wary of the baby's fragile needs. Amaya obeyed, heart pounding in tandem with the rapid volley of gunfire. In her arms, the child whimpered, tiny fists curling as if to ward off the storm breaking around them. The clash was brutal and chaotic. Nantan dodged and parried, every muscle screaming with exertion. Sweat stung his eyes, mingling with dirt and blood, as he fought not merely for survival, but for hope incarnate in the small bundle now entrusted to his care. Suddenly, a searing pain sliced through his side, a bullet's cruel kiss. He staggered, breath rasping, crimson blossoming beneath his shirt. For a fleeting moment, the desert tilted around him, warping his senses, but the fight was far from over. Summoning every shred of will, Nantan clung to consciousness, driving off another attacker with a fierce cry. His vision blurred, but a fierce roar cut through the chaos, sharp hoofbeats and war cries splitting the air. Relief and strength surged like lightning through him, as figures cloaked in tribal gear burst onto the scene. Leading them was Taina, Nantan's sister, fierce-eyed, muscular, radiating the quiet command, born of fire and blood. Her warriors moved like thunder incarnate, flanking the surprised patrol with practiced precision. "Fall back!" Taina commanded, voice steel-sharp and unyielding. The soldiers hesitated, disoriented by the sudden onslaught of Apache defenders. The tide shifted. What had been a hunting party became prey beneath. The cruel dance of arrows and war cries. Nantan, even with the burning pain, found himself shielded by his sister and her warriors. With a final surge, they pushed the patrol forces into retreat. Dust swirling like ghosts as the hunters fled into the desert night. Breathing hard, Nantan slumped against the rough bark of a sagebrush. Taina knelt beside him, fingers quick and sure, pulling out cloth and binding the wound with a steely calm that belied the urgency. "You should have said," she chided softly, eyes dark with worry. "I thought I was strong enough," Nantan rasped, managing a tired smile that spoke of shared scars and silent promises. "But this fight, it is far from over." Amaya emerged cautiously from her cover, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. She pressed forward, tenderly touching Nantan's arm, unspoken gratitude bridging the divide between their worlds. The baby gurgled softly, the fragile sound a pulse of life in the stillness that followed the storm. Taina's gaze fell on the child, a knowing, sharp look that hung heavy with unspoken questions and the burden of ancient secrets. "We move at dawn," she said grimly. "There is wisdom to seek, and dangers yet unseen." Nantan nodded, strength faltering but spirit unbroken. "The path will be hard, but we cannot let darkness claim this child." Outside, the desert night deepened, stars blinking cold sentinels above the silent earth. The echoes of gunfire faded, replaced by the whispering wind, carrying promises of battles yet to come. And as Nantan's vision blurred into shadow, the last sounds to reach him were the steady beat of horses' hooves and the distant cry of warriors returning home. The fragile sanctuary shattered, the trail ahead dark and full of peril, but with it a new thread of hope was woven into the endless tapestry of the frontier. The dawn would bring choices no soul could flee, and the true test, one of blood, loyalty, and survival, had only just begun. The camp stirred uneasily beneath the first pale light, whispers weaving through the air like restless spirits. Nantan's gaze scanned the gathering, men and women cloaked in the weight of uncertainty, their faces etched with suspicion and fear. The newborn, cradled gently by Amaya, lay nestled against her chest, swaddled and fragile, a living thread between worlds. The elder of the tribe sat apart, his lined face cast in shadow by a heavy, fur-lined hood. His eyes, sharp yet clouded by age, lingered on the infant with a cold skepticism that pierced the morning calm. He muttered under his breath, words steeped in ancient superstition, warning of the child's mark, a sign that carried a burden of ill omen. "They say the child is cursed," the elder's voice rasped, carried softly but unmistakably. "A spirit born from unrest. Such signs portend danger, not blessing." Murmurs rippled among the assembled, the air thick with unease as eyes darted between Amaya, Nantan, and the infant. The fragile peace held by courage and hope now strained under the weight of fearful tradition. Nantan stepped forward, the scars etched in his face deepening with resolve. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the murmurs. "The mark is old, yes, but it is no curse. It is a symbol of union, of a future born from the joining of paths. Our paths, theirs, the land itself. This child is not a shadow to fear. She is our hope." Beside him, Taina's steady gaze swept the crowd, her presence a pillar of strength. She spoke with fierce conviction, her voice ringing clear over the whispers. "We cannot cling to ancient fears when the future calls us to embrace what is new. This child carries the possibility of peace, not the harbinger of war." Amaya's eyes shone with fierce determination, her voice quiet but unwavering, despite the barrier of language that separated her from the tribe. She held her child close, her every gesture a testament to unyielding love and bravery against the cold tides of rejection. Hours crept forward, shadows lengthening as the camp wrestled with its own soul. The division deepened, some reluctant warriors looking upon the infant with wary eyes, others steeling their hearts to shield what could be a beacon in the gathering darkness. Then, like a thunderclap from the endless sky, messengers burst into the camp, a group of swift riders dusted with sand and urgency. Their faces were grim, shadows carved by the relentless desert sun. They bore dire news that shattered the fragile calm. "Kale comes," their leader announced, voice heavy with the weight of impending fire. His followers ride hard, their numbers growing with each march. They demand the child, threaten war if we resist. A hush fell over the crowd, the air suddenly sharp as a drawn bowstring. Eyes widened, breaths caught, harvested fear and resolve, intertwining in a knot that suffocated hope. Nantan's jaw clenched, his hand instinctively tightening around the hilt of a hidden knife beneath his cloak. Taina's fingers brushed the grip of her own blade, her steady breath a drumbeat to the mounting storm. Amaya pressed the baby to her breast, the infant's soft coos barely rising above the tense silence. Despite the exhaustion etched into her bones, a spark ignited, a fierce shield of maternal love, ready to face the coming tempest. The camp's division loomed, but a new force began to stir. A collective breath drawn, quiet but resolute. The time to choose had come. Deference to tradition clashed with the urgency of survival, and the fragile threads holding the tribe together trembled on a knife's edge. From deep within the gathering dusk, the horizon seemed to pulse with ominous promise, the dust swirling like a veil drawn before storm's fury. Nantan's voice sliced the silence, a low vow that tangled hope with defiance. They come to break us, but we will stand. For this child, for our future, no shadow of the past will claim us. Amaya's fingers, curled tighter around the infant, rested on all their shoulders, a fragile but unyielding thread weaving their fates. And far beyond the camp, where the desert met the sky in endless expanse, the thunder grew louder. Kale and his followers drawing near with the grim promise of war. The camp's restless murmurs grew louder as the morning sun painted the sky with pale streaks of light. Faces etched with weariness and suspicion gathered in the dusty clearing, their eyes darting anxiously between each other and the fragile bundle cradled in Amaya's arms. The newborn, swaddled tightly against her chest, was both a blessing and a shadow in this land, where old superstitions bore heavy weight. The elder sat apart, his fur-lined hood casting a shadow over his aged features, his voice, rough as weathered stone, broke the uneasy silence. "The child carries the mark," he said, his words dropping like stones. "Such signs are not blessings, but omens of ruin. The spirits whisper of storms to come, and this child is at their center." Whispers rippled through the camp. Some warriors shifted uneasily, others exchanged furtive glances. The faint tension felt as if the very air had thickened, hope now struggling beneath the weight of fear and tradition. Nantan stepped forward, his scars marking a face set with quiet determination. His voice cut through the murmurs, steady and firm. "This mark is old, yes, but it is not a curse. It is a symbol of unity, the joining of paths between our people and hers. This child is not a shadow to fear, but a light against the darkness." Taina stood tall beside him, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a lance piercing through doubt. "The past may hold its grudges, but the future needs courage. This child embodies possibility, peace born from understanding, not division." Amaya listened silently, her eyes reflecting tired strength. Though her language fell short among the tribe, her love spoke loudly, her hands steady, her hold protective. Each touch was a testament to a mother's fierce resolve, drawing hesitant hearts closer to a fragile hope. The sun climbed higher, shadows lengthening as the camp wrestled with its own unease. Split between old fears and new courage, the tribe teetered on the edge of fracturing. Warriors whose loyalty wavered eyed the infant warily. Others, braced to protect a fragile future, precariously balanced on a blade's edge. Suddenly, dust kicked up in the distance, raising heads and stirring swift footsteps. A group of riders burst through the swirling haze, their faces tight with urgency and battle-hardened resolve. Sand clung to their weary boots, their eyes blazing with grim purpose. "Kale is near," their leader announced, voice carrying like thunder over the silent breath of the camp. His followers come hard and fast, relentless in their demand. They seek the child, threatening fire and war if denied. A hush fell. Fear and determination twisted tight within every body present. The air was sharp, like drawn steel. Nantan's jaw tightened. Unseen fingers clenched the hilt beneath his cloak. Taina's breath was slow and sure. Hands ready on her blade's hilt, heart steady behind fierce eyes. Amaya pressed the baby tightly against her, the child cooing faintly, a fragile lullaby rising above the growing storm. "This child is our hope," Nantan said, voice low but unyielding. "We will stand for her, for our future. No shadow of the past will claim what must be." Amaya's gaze locked with Nantan's. Silent, resolute, the pact between them was clear. No matter the coming darkness, they would protect this fragile life. The camp held its breath, the horizon deepening in swirls of dust and foreboding shadows. The distant thunder of hooves was a savage promise now, edging ever closer. By dawn, Kale's forces would be upon them, and the battle for the child and the soul of the tribe would begin. The desert air was thick with the ringing clash of steel and raw cries of battle. The sun, barely peeking over the jagged canyon edges, cast a harsh light onto the scorched earth, where two warriors faced each other, locked in a desperate struggle that seemed to echo the very fate of the land itself. Nantan's muscles coiled with every strike and parry, sweat mingling with dust smeared across his weathered skin. His dark eyes burned with fierce determination, reflecting not just the fight for survival, but a deeper battle for the future, nestled in Amaya's trembling arms nearby. Opposite him, Kale moved like shadow made flesh, his every motion laced with bitterness and a cold fire that spoke of exiled vengeance. The clang of their weapons stirred the dust, which rose like ghosts between them, blurring the edges of their combat. They were two men forged from the same harsh soil, yet torn apart by convictions that could scarcely stand side by side. Nantan's voice was a growl beneath the storming blows. "This child is not the harbinger of your darkness." Kale's eyes flashed pure malice, his blade a cruel extension of his twisted will. "You are blind, warrior. The child is the key to power and to reckoning," he spat. "Your tribe's old ways will crumble beneath the weight of what she brings." Amaya knelt at the center of the chaos, clutching her newborn, her every breath a fierce shield against the carnage raging around her. Her eyes were wide, alive with terror and a mother's unbreakable resolve. The baby stirred, small hands trembling, but safe within her cradle of arms. The air hummed with tension, the ground beneath trembling, not just from the warrior's fury, but from the hope and fear interwoven in this brutal stand. Taina's voice cut through the battle like a rallying cry, sharp and unwavering. She led the defenders, young warriors formed by fire and fear, holding firm the line that protected their fragile light. Arrows sliced through the air, a chorus of nature's cruel reprisal against the surge of dark intent. The tribe's heartbeat pulsed through the land, steady and fierce, refusing to yield. The fight wore heavy on muscles and spirit. Nanten's side ached sharply where the wound had yet to heal fully, but retreat was not an option. With a fierce cry, he drove Kale back, blade meeting flesh. The enemy's sneer faltered, eyes widening as the warrior found his mark. Yet in defeat, Kale's voice carried a venomous promise. Dark futures spun from broken chains and ancient grudges. "I will not fall alone," Kale snarled, backing away slowly, desperation flickering beneath his rage. "This child will burn the worlds you cling to. Remember that." As Kale's form receded into the swirling dust, the battle's frantic rhythm softened, but the scent of smoke and the sound of ragged breaths lingered like a heavy shroud. Taina's gaze swept the field, fierce with relief and grief. She approached Nanten, steady hands moving quickly to support her brother's weight. Nanten turned his gaze to Amaya, whose eyes held a storm of emotions: fear, love, and the fragile flicker of hope. The child cooed softly, oblivious to the storm that had nearly consumed them. "We stand not just for this moment," Nanten said, voice hoarse but resolute, "but for every dawn that may come after." Taina tightened her grip on her brother's shoulder. The tribe begins to see differently now. Old fears waver in the face of what we fought for. A quiet settled over the battlefield, the sun rising higher, washing the land in harsh light that revealed scars both fresh and old. Around them, the survivors gathered, some nursing wounds, others silently contemplating the fragile thread of unity that had been woven through their shared fight. The wind whispered through the scattered sage, carrying the scent of dust and renewal. Even in the midst of hardship, the air seemed to hum with possibility, a small promise that hope might yet grow from the hardened earth. Nanten's eyes lingered on the child's faint tribal mark, a symbol no longer just of foreboding, but of shared destiny. The fight had carved new paths that wove together past and future, old hatreds and new alliances. Amaya rose, slowly, cradling the infant against her chest. Her gaze met Taina's, a silent bond forming between two women, bound by the fierce flame of protection and the weight of the journey yet to come. As the tribe began to gather closer, the elder's scowl softened just a fraction. The ancient lines of his face revealing the first cracks in the wall of tradition. But the shadow of what was to come still lingered sharp and close. The cost of change was heavy, and the road ahead fraught with the dangers of old grudges and new enemies. With the battlefield behind them, but the war far from over, Nanten stepped forward to address his tribe, voice carrying clear and steady across the silent clearing. "This child is not our curse," he said. "She is our hope, our future. We must stand together, not as remnants of the past, but as a tribe reborn." The murmurs grew, some hesitant, some fierce, a fragile tapestry of belief, braided tight with courage. Far beyond the camp, the desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, but the deafening sound of hooves echoed relentlessly on the horizon. Kale's forces had not given up. They were coming, riding hard and unwilling to surrender. And with their approach, the fragile peace of the tribe would be shattered once more. The first light of dawn spilled slowly over the weary camp, casting long shadows that stretched across the dusty earth like the fading fears of a hard-fought night. The air, heavy with the scent of sage and smoke, trembled with a fragile hope, woven from the threads of scars, sacrifices, and unexpected bonds. Nantan stood before the gathered tribe, his weathered face etched with determination and quiet strength. At his side, Amaya cradled her newborn child, the fragile embodiment of a future hardly dared to be imagined. Around them, the air was thick with tension, the murmurs of the old ways clashing with the cautious breath of change. The elder, usually stern and immovable, cast a lingering gaze toward the infant. His eyes, sharp despite age, held the weight of generations steeped in superstition. For a moment, the camp held its breath, the unspoken fear of ancient prophecies lurking like shadows behind every gaze. Then, as if stirred by the courage burning in Nantan's voice, he spoke, not with the cold finality of before, but with a tentative crack of understanding. The mark, it speaks not only of warning, but of union. Perhaps the time has come to cast aside our fears. This child may yet carry the hope we have long awaited. A ripple of quiet passed over the assembled warriors and villagers. Tena stepped forward, her gaze fierce but steady, holding the eyes of every soul present. We have fought against the darkness together. Now we must stand for what light remains. This child is a symbol, not of ruin, but of strength born from many paths entwined. Amaya's hands tightened around the infant, her eyes shimmering with unyielding resolve, despite the exhaustion writ across her face. Though her words were few, the fierce love etched in every glance bridged the language between worlds. Her family now stood before her, not just by blood, but forged in the crucible of trust and risk. Across the camp, warriors who had once eyed the child with suspicion now exchanged glances. Heavy with reconsideration, the seed of acceptance had taken root, nourished by the bravery of those who had protected what many feared. Old fears began to waver under the weight of new truths. But peace was not yet secured. Suddenly, the earth trembled beneath the thunder of approaching hooves. A dust cloud rose in the distance. Kale and his followers, relentless, riding hard as the desert sun scorched the lands. The camp stirred, warriors grasping for weapons, hearts pounding in unison with the pounding hooves. Nantan looked to his sister, Tena, whose eyes sparked with the fire of battle yet to come. "Prepare yourselves," Nantan commanded, voice steady and resolute. "We fight not only for the child, but for the soul of our people. This is our moment." The clash erupted with fierce intensity. The desert air filled with the metallic ring of steel and the sharp whistle of arrows slicing the sky. Nanton faced Kale in the heart of the storm, their blades carving the space between past grievances and future hope. Kale's sneer was twisted by bitterness, his movements sharp but haunted by desperation. "You cannot stop what will come. The prophecy cannot be undone." Nanton's eyes burned with answered fire. "This child defies your shadow. She is the dawn after the longest night." Their weapons met again and again, each strike echoing the deep-rooted conflict woven into their souls. Amid the chaos, Amaya huddled protected by Taina, and the tribe's fiercest warriors, her every breath a defiant prayer. Then, with a final, powerful strike, Anton disarmed Kale, dropping him to his knees amid the swirling dust. The bitterness in Kale's gaze twisted to something quieter, a grudging respect tempered by the weight of defeat. "I will not surrender the darkness," Kale hissed, before retreating. "But this is not the end." The clang of battle faded into the heavy silence of aftermath. Taina approached Nanton, steady hands pressing to his wounds with practiced care. Her eyes dark but relieved. "We have won this day, but the path ahead remains fraught." Nanton nodded, exhaustion threatening to overtake him, but spirit unbroken. "This victory is but the first step. Our futures are bound to this child's survival." Around them, the camp gathered, faces marked by weariness, yet shining with new purpose. The elder, his voice softer now, spoke with an air of reconciliation. "Let the past's whispers become lessons, not chains." The fragile infant stirred in Amaya's arms, a soft coo rising like a hymn to the morning's promise. The tribal mark, once an omen of fear, now shimmered like a quiet beacon of unity and renewal. Amaya met Taina's gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. Strength born of shared struggle, and the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Nanton stepped forward, voice carrying clear across the stillness. "This child is not our curse, she is our hope. Together we forge a new path, one where unity transcends old wounds, and where every dawn holds the promise of rebirth." The camp slowly responded, a murmur growing into a steady chorus of agreement. The winds of change swept the desert, carrying away the dust of conflict and heralding a new era. Far beyond, where the endless plains met the horizon, the first true light of day bathed the land in gentle gold, a quiet testament to the resilience of life and the enduring spirit of those who dared to hope. And so, beneath that vast sky, a warrior, a mother, and her child stood at the dawn of their shared journey, symbols of a future born from courage, forgiveness, and the unwavering bond of family. The trail ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was lit by the steady flame of peace. The frontier, wild and relentless, had been forever changed.